Welcome back to the channel, everyone. Today we're looking at a few setup adjustments that I often have to encourage players to make to help them to free up the backswing. So for those of you out there that are looking for more rotation in backswing, improving your backswing, this will be a good one for you. Thanks once again for tuning in. We are getting to that phase now where we're starting to ramp up towards a new season. I would often encourage players at about this time of year to just at least start getting clear on, from a movement standpoint, the key areas for them to move better going into the year. If any of you have interest in getting my take on that, then you can access my coaching through Skillist online, or go to my website ianmellorgolf.com, and on there you can connect with me directly and we can set up whatever the best opportunity is for you to get clear on your game. Okay, moving into the video. So really regularly I'll work with players, and it's evident through backswing that they are somewhat limited somewhere moving into their trail side. So I'm showing you down the line here, because from down the line what you typically see is there might be an adaptation through the hands and the club where they get inside. They also may just look really limited from a rotational standpoint with the pelvis and the upper body. Often from face on, you start seeing people, thrust, tilt a little bit more. You get all these compensations simply because they've not got the opportunity to move in areas that allow for a better rotation. So very common patterns that I see. We're just going to go through the chain on the trail side in a couple of areas that you could look and explore with yourself. So very common one, first of all, is I find that players often have the perception that to load the trail side, they have to turn the trail foot in. Okay, so turning the trail foot in is going to limit internal rotation in the vast majority of players. I can't really think of a situation where it wouldn't. Okay, so turning that foot in will limit internal rotation in your trail hip. So that is good for some players. If you're a player with a lot of range and you may need the sense of control because you've not developed the stability in your hip, that's okay. Then maybe you can play around with a turned in foot. There's definitely a number of players out there where I would allow them to get away with it. But for a number of players, a good starting point would be turning the foot out so that the flare, if I was to put my club down, is about a golf ball from the club shaft there. So just opening that foot out will often open up the trail side here and allow for a little bit more internal rotation in their trail hip. And around the trail hip in backswing with players, what I like to reference with them is that if they were to, say, put their fingers down the crease in the pant there, can they close that space? Can they pinch their fingers, keeping their big toe on the floor and getting a nice sense of load? Let me just find the right spot here so you just see down the line. The nice sense of load back here, almost in the top of their trail glute here. Okay, so you want to feel as though you're in a good position where you could actually push off and push into your lead side. It would be a more intuitive way to go about that. So if we are turning that foot in, and then we're hitting end range and internal rotation really early, you can see my belt buckle hasn't really moved very much. So that's the first area to look at, the foot position. We're going to move up now, and we're going to look at the knee position, because and I'm just simply using that as a reference for the position of the femur, because there are definitely players where I see the foot position looks like they're in a good spot for them, but then the knee will be in. And then obviously that there you can see is internally rotating the femur there. So they're losing internal rotation in their hip as well. Okay, so again, the nice reference to the knee I like is somewhat centered over the foot for players. Now through backswing, if I load there, you'll see the knee will start to point just slightly outside the foot there. And for each player there, it's just making sure that they're moving in a way that is healthy for them. It's never going to cause any injury at the knee, but it is okay for the knee to move a little in the swing. Through backswing, it should point a little out, and then downswinging, it's going to point a little in. Okay, but let's make sure for most players, let's get it started somewhat over the middle of the foot. Then as far as the hip, I'm actually going to go the down the line position here. As we go into anterior tilt, which would be the belt buckle pointing down, the there's an optimum range for each player as far as the tilt of the pelvis in this sagittal plane, this down the line plane. So if we get into too much, we're losing range of internal rotation yet again. Okay, so we want to make sure that the pelvis is tilted and the right amount for that player. And again, everyone's a little bit different. This is why I work with the vault performance consultants in the gym, the doctors, just to get the baselines for all the players I work with that are happy to go and see the doctors. Because once we have the baseline and we know where they're getting their optimum ranges from, then we can just continuously stay on the setup to make sure they've got those good opportunities to move in their swing. Okay, so we've looked at the foot, we've got a little reference to the knee. We know that from down the line we want the optimum position for the pelvis. I'll give you a little reference point here actually. I like players, if they were to stand tall and get a sense of the pelvis being level, or even the belt being level there, so you can see I'm using the club as a reference here. As we bend down into setup, as we get a little 1 inch bend in the knees, as we bend down, the distance between, let's just say, the sternum and the belt buckle remains the same. So a lot of value in learning how to do a good hip hinge, but that's a nice little reference there, is as we soften the knees, can we keep the distance between the belt buckle and the sternum there? So that's one little reference I use very regularly with players, and hip hinge might be something that I'll cover again at some point, because it just get into that setup position. You can see the value a little bit here now as far as the influence it has on your load into that trail hip. Okay, and then we're just going to go up one more section here now. We're going to look a little bit at the rib cage, because and the shoulder position. I'd say the other pattern that I see the most is in players set up from face on, in taking their rest position, they'll reach down here, and often in the arm hang, they'll end up side bending and starting very crunched and compressed around the trail side here. So you can see how I'm almost crunching laterally here on the right side, and players will start there. So in that position there, the rib cage isn't going to move very well, isn't going to rotate very well. So little reference point here is that from, I'd say down the line, just make sure your shoulders, we're not reaching too much that way. A little bit is fine. It actually, a little bit in a lot of players actually provides range for the shoulder to retract and then rotate, externally rotate. So a little bit is fine, but if someone's reaching too much this way, they're then often creating compression in around the chest here, and then often that reach will shift the rib cage and they'll end up laterally bending. Okay, so little reference point is seam on the shirt here. Let's just try and maintain the length there, make sure it's not overly stretched this way, and also like this seam on the shirt is lined up almost with, let's just say, the little just behind the ear. Okay, that would be a nice little reference there. It's not getting too much reached in front. And then the distance from the top of the hip and the bottom rib, as you go down, they remain the same. So those two references there. Okay, so we're not getting too overreached here. We're keeping the seam on the shirt somewhat lined up with just behind the ear, and then we're keeping the distance between the top of the hip and the rib cage the same there. So there's a variety of checks I'll use for the trail side. And if I wanted to add, and this is where there's so much value in building a routine, because then you're not, okay, foot, knee, hip, rib cage, shoulder. The routine I often give to players or share with players that I find is a nice place to start is just holding the club in front, getting a nice shoulder position, getting the pelvis level as we showed before. So we're in here in our setup here, 1 inch bend in the knees, and then allowing ourselves to fall there. And often if we do a nice job there, in doing that, we're starting with our feet together, stepping out to the width that we want, 1 inch bend and down. You'll notice also doing a good job with the foot position, knee position, hip position, tie all those in. There's so much value in doing this away from the golf course. One thing I emphasize with players all the time is is that you can do so much work away. Mirror work is fantastic, especially for setup stuff, and building awareness of what it feels like to be in a good setup, or what it feels like to go through a good movement routine. You really can't do enough of this stuff because what you want is, so when you get to the golf course, you don't have to think about it. You're just flowing through your routines. You may take a video here and there and check it, but then you can actually start working on maybe some other areas of your swing, maybe transition, whatever it may be, whatever that dominant pattern for you is that you want to work away from, you can move on to those areas. But setup is just so key, and if you get set up well there, backswing is going to really, you should find it a lot easier to move, get a good load, get a good rotation of the rib cage, and from that position there, you've just got so much more opportunity to hit good golf shots. At first, if you've opened up that range, just internally, neurologically, the brain might be like, wow, I've got so much more to work with here. I am going to have to learn to use that. In which case that becomes the learning process, breaking things down, slower swings, whatever that may be for you, to allow you to incorporate that range that you now have.